Jill Dando.
Jill Dando.
Jill Dando.
Jill Dando. Jill Dando who?
Jill.
On the morning of the 26th of April 1999, Helen Doble left her home in Fulham, West London to run an errand. Whilst walking along Gowan Avenue, she was surprised to see her friend's car parked outside number 29, as she knew her friend was now living in Cheswick, another area of London, with her fiancé, as they were to be married later that year, and she was in the process of selling her Gowan Avenue home. In the hopes of seeing her friend, Helen approached the front gate of the property, only to discover something terrifying. Laying there, on the front step of number 29 Gowan Avenue, was her friend, surrounded in a large pool of blood. Not only did she stumble upon this horrific scene, but she was about to place a 999 call that would monopolise the covers of every national newspaper, media outlets and news broadcasts for months to come. This would become one of Britain's biggest police inquiries since the Yorkshire Ripper case back in the 1970s, and would leave one question in the minds of millions: who killed Jill Dando? Jill Wendy Dando was born on the 9th of November 1961 in Weston-super-Mare in Somerset in England. She was a bright kid, intelligent. She was always smiling and full of fun. Family and friends would say that she was just generally a nice, warm person, a typical girl next door. She would go on to study journalism at Cardiff Metropolitan University. She was a keen member of the local dramatic society and often volunteered at the Sunshine Hospital radio station in Weston-super-Mare. Jill would go on to her first job as a trainee reporter for the Weston Mercury, which was a wee newspaper publication that covered the Somerset area. This was the same office where her brother and father previously worked. In 1985, she would become a newsreader on the radio. My mum always told me that I had a face for radio. I wonder what she meant by that. She started working for the British Broadcasting Corporation that year in various roles as a newsreader for different radio stations, before transitioning to television, where she would remain from 1986 until the mid-90s. She would present such programmes as the BBC Breakfast News, the 1 o'clock news, and she would deviate slightly and also host a daytime show called Holiday. Eventually Jill would transition to a show called Crime Watch UK.
Thanks very much, studio. Can we stand by for transmission?
Britain's most important unsolved cases. Now live, you can help solve them.
This real-life crime programme features detectives from across the UK in the Crime Watch studio to take viewers' calls in an attempt to solve some of Britain's biggest unsolved cases. The show, which usually airs a new episode every month or two, also features crimes caught on camera in a CCTV roundup and information on arrests and convictions in previous cases that resulted from viewers' tips. The show was famous for segments of crime reconstructions, where they would use actors and locations in order to reconstruct crimes as they happened, in the hopes of jogging the memories of viewers and prompting witnesses to come forward. In 1997, she won the prestigious BBC Television Personality of the Year award and was referred to as the Golden Girl of Television. In the same year, she would meet Alan Farthing. Their relationship blossomed and soon they would be engaged, setting a wedding date for September of 1999. Unfortunately, she would never get the chance to walk down the aisle. Her millions of beloved fans nationwide would never get to see her married. Instead of the national media celebrating alongside the couple, her face would adorn the covers of newspapers and magazines, but not in celebration. It would be a time of mourning, a time of fear, the main story being the murder of a British TV icon. On the morning of the 26th of April 1999, Jill left her fiancé's house in Cheswick. CCTV footage shows Jill doing some shopping at the Kingsmall shopping centre in Hammersmith, London. After running a few more errands, she arrived at her property at 29 Gowan Avenue in Fulham, just after 11:30, where an unknown male followed her into the front garden and up to her front door, where he pushed her to the ground, pressed a 9mm handgun to her head and fired a single bullet. Approximately 14 minutes later, Helen Doble would find her friend Jill lying in a pool of her own blood on the doorstep.
Thank you. Ambulance service, hello?
Hello, ambulance. I'm walking along Gowan Avenue. It looks like there's somebody collapsed. Confidentially, it looks like it's Jill Dando, and she's collapsed in her door. There's a lot of blood.
Can you just approach and check that the lady's breathing for me?
She doesn't look as if she's breathing. She's got blood coming from her nose. Her arms are blue.
I just need to find out if she's breathing. Is the lady's chest going up and down?
Oh my God, no, I don't think she's alive.
Right, okay.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry, I'm going to get some help there as fast as I can.
A forensic study indicated that Dando had been shot by a bullet from a 9mm short calibre semi-automatic pistol, with the gun pressed against her head at the moment of the shot. The cartridge appeared to have been subject to workshop modification, possibly to reduce its charge. Richard Hughes, our next door neighbour, heard a scream from Dando, which he thought was someone surprising someone else and didn't think it was a scream of distress, but he heard no gunshot. Hughes looked out of his front window and, whilst not realising what had happened, made the only certain sighting of the killer, a 6-foot-tall white man aged around 40 walking away from Dando's house. All evidence would point to a contract killing carried out by an unknown assassin. However, the police wouldn't get to that conclusion for quite some time. After the murder, there was intense media coverage.
Jill Dando, known and loved by millions, has been brutally murdered. The 37-year-old presenter died in hospital after being found shot through the head on her own doorstep.
Good evening. The television presenter Jill Dando has been murdered outside her home in West London. Miss Dando, who was 37, was attacked just before lunchtime today. She'd once said that she feared her job as a presenter of the Crime Watch program may have made her a potential target herself.
An investigation by the Metropolitan Police named Operation Oxborough proved fruitless for over a year. Dando's status as a well-known public figure had brought her into contact with thousands of people, and she was known to millions. There was huge speculation regarding the motive of her murder. Gowan Avenue is a fairly typical residential street in West London, with terraced houses running down each side and cars parked along the curbside the entire length of the street. On the morning of the shooting, it's estimated that there would have been between 50 and 100 people passing through Gowan Avenue, yet at the time of the shooting, at 11:30 in the morning, on a busy residential street in West London, there were none. With over a month having passed after the murder of a public figure, the police were feeling the pressure to get results. Any results. That brings us to a fellow called Barry George. Unbeknownst to the police at this point, Barry George had been sitting in amongst the investigation all along. Throughout the entire investigation, there were numerous phone calls and tips given to the police. There were special units set up within the police, and their sole purpose was to trace, interview and eliminate these people from the inquiries. To do this could take a matter of hours or a matter of days depending on the individual in question. One of these names that were given to the police and was failed to be followed up on right away was Barry George. Barry George lived about half a mile from Dando's house. He had a history of stalking women, sexual offences and other antisocial and attention-seeking behaviour. George was put under surveillance and arrested on the 25th of May 2000 and charged with Jill Dando's murder 3 days later. This was following a search of George's property. Witness testimony stated that the man seen around the area at the time of the murder was wearing a dark-coloured 3/4 length coat. The police discovered a similar coat inside the home of Barry George. During a forensic examination of the coat, a tiny particle of gunshot residue was discovered, and this had the same composition as the GSR found on the shell casing recovered from the scene and in the hair of the victim. On the 2nd of July 2001, Barry George was convicted of the murder of Jill Dando and sentenced to life in prison. 7 years later, George had the conviction overturned due to the evidence being thin and that the gunshot residue was found to be an airborne particle. It's also of note that George had learning disabilities, and even after repeatedly being asked by detectives if he killed Miss Dando, he would continually say, "No sir." Let's take a look at some other theories surrounding this case. Obvious thoughts would be a jealous ex-lover or jealous secret lover for that matter, but investigations, interviews with friends and family, as well as phone and email records would rule this out. There's also the possibility that a deranged fan may have killed Dando after she had rejected his approaches. Jill's brother, Nigel, informed detectives that she had become concerned by some guy pestering her in the few days before her death, but this was ruled out by detectives. Following the Jimmy Savile sexual abuse scandal, a claim was made that Dando had investigated a paedophile ring at the BBC during the mid-1990s and had handed a dossier containing her findings to the BBC management, purportedly prompting a revenge attack. The BBC said it had seen no evidence to support the claim, also the fact that Jill Dando was merely a TV presenter. She wasn't an investigative journalist. Cold case reviews by the police after 2008 concluded that Dando was killed by a professional assassin in a hard contact execution. Pressing the gun against her head would have acted as a suppressor, muffling the sound of the shot and preventing the killer from being sprayed with blood. In 2012, a cold case review named Serbian warlord Arkan as a suspect, although by this time he had died. In early 1999, the UK and NATO were involved in the Kosovo War, opposing Serbia. Immediately after the Dando killing, a number of telephone calls were made to the BBC and other media outlets, claiming responsibility for the killing on behalf of Serbian groups. In 2019, it was reported that the British National Criminal Intelligence Service had given an intelligence report to the Dando murder inquiry, claiming that the murder was in retaliation for a bombing of a Serbian television station in which several people and journalists were killed. The report highlighted a possible connection between the bullet used to kill Dando and bullets used in assassinations in Germany, namely handmade markings that were found on them. A Serbian opposition journalist was assassinated outside his home in Belgrade just a few days before Dando's murder, and the method used in both cases were identical. In 2019, 4 men of the Serbian Secret Service were convicted of his murder. Journalist Bob Woffenden advanced the view that a Yugoslav group was behind the Dando killing, and in various newspaper articles contested all the grounds on which the police had dismissed this possibility. I mean, let's face it, with such a high-profile murder, there will always be so many different theories. This becomes an issue when the theories become a wee bit less absurd and start to prompt such thoughts as, hang on, this could be true. In these instances, such theories may well monopolise the time of investigating officers. These could cloud judgment, develop confirmation bias, and what's worse, take valuable time and effort away from finding the true answer to the puzzle. When you hear hooves, think horse, not zebra. Let's just take another wee look at Barry George, shall we? So remember I said that Barry George was in a pile of possible leads early on, and the police failed to follow up on it. Well, this is most likely because, amongst other things, Barry George had a habit of changing his name, assuming other identities. Heck, at one point he was even arrested for impersonating a police officer. Yeah, he had applied to the Metropolitan Police and was subsequently rejected. He then cut up the rejection letter and constructed a makeshift warrant card to identify himself as a cop. When George was on trial for killing Jill Dando, his defence would argue that he lacked the mental capacity to plan and execute such a thing. Prior to the trial, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and was reported to have an IQ of 75. So, early on in life, Barry George would change his name to Paul Gadd. Those of you that don't know, Paul Gadd was the real name of Gary Glitter. When he was arrested in 1980 for impersonating a police officer, he appeared in court dressed like Gary Glitter. You know in court when they ask you to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and then they say, state your name for the court. Well, he claimed again to be Paul Gadd, an unemployed musician, and that he owned a company which represented other rock bands. He later appeared in a local newspaper, claiming to be the winner of a British karate championship. So Barry went on to join the Territorial Army. He was swiftly discharged from that. Here lads, check this guy, get him to After this, he assumed the identity of Tom Palmer. Who's Tom Palmer, I hear you asking? Well, remember back in 1980, the World News reported the Iranian embassy siege. Well, that was ended by the good lads of the British SAS, and Mr. Palmer was one of the elite soldiers that helped end the siege. In June of 1981, George was charged with 2 counts of indecent assault against 2 different women. So let's see, what else did Big Bazza get up to? Oh aye, then he went on to call himself Steve Majors and claimed to be a stuntman. He was able to convince a stadium to book him for a stunt show in which he would jump across 4 double-decker buses on roller skates. Later that year, he was charged and convicted of the attempted rape of another woman, for which he served 18 months in the slammer. I swear, you couldn't write this, lads. You could not write it. Stick with me here. I know this seems like we're drifting off topic, but just hang on. It'll all make sense, I promise. On the 10th of January 1983, he was found within the grounds of Kensington Palace, which at the time was the home of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. He was found wearing a balaclava, he had a knife and a poem that he had handwritten for Prince Charles. I mean, if he just wanted to give Charles a nice wee poem, then what was the balaclava and the knife all about? So when he was 29, he married a 35-year-old Japanese student. She would later say that it was only a marriage of convenience and that it was, quote, nonetheless violent and terrifying. A few months after getting married, he would be arrested and charged for assaulting her, but the case never went to court. He was subsequently arrested another twice for 2 separate cases of indecent assault in 1990 and in 1992. Both cases never made it to court. So let's go back. The reason his name was lost in the initial investigation into the Jill Dando case was because his name was reported as Barry Bulsara, which was the birth name of singer Freddie Mercury. Look at his face. Like I said previously, he was diagnosed as having Asperger's and to have a highly obsessive personality disorder. His defence said that he would simply lack the cunning to carry out and subsequently get away with Jill's murder. Another famous murder of a celebrity is that of John Lennon, carried out by Mark Chapman on the doorstep of Lennon's residence. Chapman was an obsessed fan who modelled himself on Holden Caulfield, a figure from a book titled The Catcher in the Rye, much like Barry George did with several famous people throughout his life. During the police search of George's home, there were several other things found which would be classed as circumstantial. There were numerous notepads filled with names and addresses of women in the surrounding areas, as well as the corresponding number plates of vehicles. The surrounding area, of course, includes Gowan Avenue. The police also recovered a large number of undeveloped camera film, which, once developed, would reveal covert photos taken of women in and around the same area, as well as photographs of presenters on the actual TV, including Jill Dando. There were also several copies of the BBC in-house magazine recovered, which almost certainly featured Jill. The police forensics concluded that the pistol used in the murder was modified in a certain way. I'll show you what type of pistol I mean. This photo was recovered from Big Bazza's flat. This photo though, it couldn't be used in court because the prosecution were unable to say without a shadow of a doubt that the man in the photo was Barry George. Although all the evidence pointing towards George is circumstantial, and I'm telling you, there's a lot of it, it's undeniable if you ask me. We can rule out the crazy Serbian hitman theory right away. A busy West London street in broad daylight. What assassin would choose that locus? Her attendance there was purely by chance. Yes, there are certain investigators that seem to think her phone was hacked in order to reveal her movements. Really? The next thing they'll say is that there was a suborbital drone following around Kings Mall Shopping Centre. When police and paramedics arrived on the scene, it was noted that Jill's front door key was already in the lock as she was in the process of unlocking her front door when the killer came up behind her. Surely a professional would have pushed her into the property, thus eliminating noise and any eyewitnesses. Barry George, or sorry, I should say a man fitting George's description, was seen lurking around Gowan Avenue in the hours prior to Jill's murder. There was no obvious motive. Jill's personal belongings, her phone, her jewellery, her handbag, all still remained at the scene. Staff at the Hammersmith and Fulham Action for the Disabled in Gresswell Street later testified that George had entered their building there at 11:50 AM on the morning of the murder and appeared in an agitated state. He asked to discuss some accommodation issues he was having. He was told that he can't just walk off the street into an appointment. He would need to make an appointment, which he did for the next day, an appointment which he never attended. So on the 28th, 2 days after the murder, he returned to the Hammersmith and Fulham Action for the Disabled and was like, "Hey guys, see you a few days ago." Yeah, the 26th. Oh, the day of the murder. Remember I came in here and was talking to you lot. Go on. Well, what time was that? He then sprinted round the corner to the local taxi company, which he had also visited just after the murder, and asked them the same question. This is what's called building a bullshit alibi. But hey, listen, I'm just a wee Scottish guy making a YouTube video. What do I know really? I just think that it's funny that after George being acquitted of the charges that he was refused compensation because, and I quote, he is not innocent enough. What does that mean? I also think that it's a bit of an insult to the original prosecutors and the jury that found him guilty in the first place. With Jill being the presenter of Crime Watch, as I said, it's all about detecting unsolved crime with reconstructions and the help of detectives and the public. It was visibly heartbreaking for her co-presenter and personal friend Nick Ross to have to film a segment about this case, as Jill and Nick had done so many times before. He never would have imagined that Jill would be the victim in one of those cases.
This is a sombre, and for me, a surreal Crime Watch UK. For all of us here, it can be gruelling coping with crimes against victims who are strangers. It's been almost unbearable dealing with Jill's death. Jill Dando was much more than a colleague. She was everyone's friend. Crime Watch is poorer without her. But this programme was her passion. And now, as Jill helped others, we hope we can do the same for her.
It's been 23 years since the brutal killing of this beloved British presenter. To be honest, I can't help but feel that maybe the police did drop the ball a wee bit on this one. Maybe for a period of time they were so focused on zebras when they should have been thinking horses. That's all for this one, folks. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to watch my wee video. Stay safe and, as always, keep smiling.